welcome everybody. It's great to have you all here. I'm Lucy Castaldo. I'm the director of IS183 Art School, and I'd like to welcome you to this virtual artist talk with Joe Wheaton. For those of you that don't know, IS183 is a nonprofit community art school, and we're based in Stockbridge. Our mission is to provide hands-on experiences in the visual arts for all ages, all incomes, and all skill levels. We offer studio-based programs in multiple disciplines year-round, and now we've ventured into online programming. You can find our virtual classes and some in-person opportunities and learn more about us on our website at is183.org. And IS183 strives to support local artists through access to exhibition opportunities, residencies, and equipment. The goal of this Artist Talk series is to highlight the wealth of talent in our region and provide a paid opportunity for an artist to gain exposure. A couple of housekeeping notes. Please familiarize yourself with your mute button and ensure you use it while Joe is presenting and when you have any background noise. There will be a Q&A following Joe's presentation. You're welcome to add questions as they come up using our chat feature. And once we open for questions, we'll use a combination of questions from the chat and live questions. To ask a question live during Q&A, please use the raise hand button, which you can find under More, or when clicking Participants at the bottom of the screen. You can also just ask to be called on in the chat or type your question in to have it read aloud. And lastly, we are recording this presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joe Wheaton. Joe is a Berkshire-based artist who creates work using sculpture, photography, and video installation. You might know him from his fabulous otherworldly projections at events and steel sculptures at outdoor spaces throughout the Berkshires. Tonight, Joe will be discussing his trajectory as an artist and has lots of visuals to share. So thank you all for joining us, and I'll turn things over to Joe.
Just in time, huh?
Hey. Hi, Carol. Michael.
Hey, Joe. Good to see you.
Joe.
Hey, thank you, everybody, for showing up. I know there's a coup to watch, so I appreciate that you're here. Anyhow, also thanks to Lucy and Brielle and IS183 for inviting me to participate in this excellent series. I'm going to talk just about my trajectory as an artist because it's a kind of circumlocuitous route. And I was born in the Netherlands in 1959, and my parents were both historians and living over there, and lived there till I was about 2, moved to Cambridge, where I lived till I was about 5. We moved to Paris, where I started art school at the age of 5. No, it was just a regular school, but art was what I loved. And we lived there till I was about 7 or 8 and moved back to Cambridge. And just a little background, my parents were both huge art enthusiasts. They loved music. We spent a lot of time in nature. We spent summers in the Maine woods, living in a house with no electricity or plumbing and miles from any other houses. It was on a private lake. And so nature was, something I always loved. It was like my best friend all summer. So we always built stuff. There was a piano there. I remember making a fan to cool myself in my bed with a foot pedal out of the piano keys from a piano that had been left in the boathouse. Anyhow, so I started doing pottery when I was very young. There was a place in Cambridge called Project, which was this terrific kind of cooperative space. I paid $50 a month and I could go in and throw whenever I felt like it. And so I was often in there. I was hyperactive, so I think things that engaged your physical creature were wonderful for me. And pottery was kind of quick, you were in and out. You had something right away. I stayed with pottery. I had a teacher I was at Brown and Nichols in Cambridge, and at some point he asked me if, you know, he would mind putting one of my pots in a case out in the hallway. And I didn't know what he was talking about. I couldn't understand why in God's name he wanted to put my pot. Well, he said he wanted other people to see it. And that just flabbergasted me. I was totally, so for the first time, I really was made aware of the fact that I was communicating with people. And that really kind of registered with me. So I went on, I kept doing pottery. I went to a small boarding school in Maine. And when I was finished there, applied to Alfred and got in, strangely enough, because I was not a great student, got in a lot of trouble. And, but anyhow, I think they wanted me out. And so I went to Alfred, which was a terrific school. It's a college of ceramics, for those of you who don't know, in upstate New York, and just a terrific place. It was small. It was across the street from the state school, which was an agricultural school. And it was just, the teachers were incredible. It was much more conceptual than maybe was practical, but I went from being a functional potter to never touching clay again. The first 2 years, we did studio classes, and you could choose from glass or printmaking, photography, sculpture, and so they really wanted you to have a broad palette when you decided you were going to get around to making something. So it's the first place I did metalwork. I did a blacksmithing class with somebody who absolutely loathed me. And he thought he was going to run me out of the class. And I made sure that I was the best you know, guy in the class by the time it was over. And I never left, and developed a total love for metal. And I think metal, because I felt like it made all my excuses for me. It was everything I wasn't. It was strong and butch and malleable, and you could make a mistake and correct it, and it wasn't visible. It was a terrific, and it has, you know, incredible properties. You can, you know, do what gravity doesn't suggest is possible. Anyhow, so that's where I did sculpture there. I had done at boarding school photography, and I loved photography. To me, that was always kind of magic. Just watching, we developed all our own film and printed our own pictures, and I was a terrible photographer, and I'm still not a great photographer. But the idea that you can lift an image off of time has always amazed me. And so I've always taken pictures. I have never erased a single digital image. Why would you? And so I have a lot of pictures, many of which I don't look at, but once in a while you come upon something and you think, oh my God, wow. So anyhow, I moved to the Berkshires in '81, and had been I had kind of left school in the middle of the year to go to a party at Studio 54, and I never went back to school. And New York practically ate me alive. But eventually I moved to the Berkshires. My sister, Kate, was living here, and I thought I would chill out and get out of here because it was damn quiet. And there were no young people back here then, and I was about 20. And it just didn't seem like there was much for me there, but it was a safe place, and I made friends right away. Anyhow, the Berkshires is remarkable. So my first job was at the Lenox Country Club as a groundskeeper. They hired me to rake leaves, which I just loved doing because it was physical. I was outside, and you know, I was out of my all the other habits. I got a job as a dishwasher at Ganesh Cafe, and eventually moved to work in the kitchen with a friend of mine, Bernie Mallon, who had been the chef at Ganesh. And things didn't work out at the restaurant that he moved into, and we ended up opening our own place called Chez Vous. And we started in the catering business, and Chez Vous means at your house. And so it was an appropriate name. And then some years later, we opened this little cafe that Matt Larkin designed called La Fête Chez Vous, which means the party at your house. And it was, to us, it was kind of like, come on over, have a piece of cake and a coffee. And we made all our own pastry, and we had takeout food and did picnics in the summer. But our main business was catering. If you've ever done any work in the restaurant, you know that it's every minute of every day of your life. So it was fine for a while. And then in 1990, I made the mistake of running into this guy, Richard Lopez, my spouse, and taking a welding class at Taconic High School. And I thought, I hate my life. I had to hire Dick to work a party to see him, and my heart was not in the catering anymore. I felt like we'd exhausted all that might be wonderful about it. We were doing parties in New York, and anyhow, I think I was over it. And welding, boy, did that seem like a lot of fun. I built a studio in my garage in Pittsfield in the middle of a kind of residential neighborhood, and tried to be quiet, but it was hard. By the way, Dick is a mystery writer, and this is his newest book called Killer Reunion. It's terrific. His books are wonderful. He's also a mystery writer or a reviewer for the Washington Post. So anyhow, check out his series. It is so excellent. This is number 16. My first commission, so I was working in my garage in Pittsfield, and my first commission was from a friend, the uncle of one of my neighbors in Cambridge, Clint Elliott, who lives in Tyringham. And I think he realized I was a fish out of water and wanted to give me something to do. He was going away for the winter and said, why don't you make this something classical for my stairwell? And there was this very tall stairwell. Anyhow, I made this crazy, and I couldn't find a picture of it. The thing is gilt with 22 karat gold, and it is so, you practically need sunglasses to look at it. It's so bright. But this is one of the details from it. He wanted, and so I was kind of settling all my scores on this mirror. It was about, the injustices of marriage and guns and, everything I thought was wrong with the world. So that's all, I settled all my scores on the mirror facade. From that, I moved into making kind of high style, kind of one-off furniture in metal, and kind of taking wood designs and doing things that you could do with metal, but you could do with wood, but also do in metal. And I always hated wood. Wood was never my friend. I felt like it revealed too much about me, that I was sloppy and inaccurate. Metal, you can blow a hole in it and fix it. Nobody will ever know. It's your best friend. So I started doing, these were some footstools I made. They were rolled steel and a lot of gold leaf. This was the early 80s or 90s. There was a lot of money in New York. I was in the Holly Hunt showrooms in Chicago and LA, and that got really boring because you ended up just making the same thing again and again. And I felt like I was back making hors d'oeuvres, 400 truffles with a little keynote on it for Bernstein's birthday or something. I was like, I could not make another urn. So I thought, the whole time I had, had some good success selling the furniture. You could charge a fair amount of money for one-offs, but it was not satisfying. And I really wanted to make sculpture. And Clem Kalischer was just down the street. Our restaurant was in Stockbridge on Main Street, down the little alley where Alice's first place was called the Back Door. And one day Clem came in and he said, oh, I don't know. I didn't know him at the time. He came in and said, I don't know if anything will come of this, but I told the New York Times they should do a piece about you. And it happened to coincide with what was it? The anniversary of Alice's Restaurant having been written, the song. And so it was in all the papers. Nancy Fitzpatrick sent a copy from the Herald Tribune in London. You know, it was just everywhere. And I thought, oh my God, we had a meeting in New York the next day. I said, I can't go. Stayed home. We never got a single phone call as a result of that article. So I thought, I will never take out an advertisement, because if, you know, you can't, it was in every USA Today in the Sunday section, nothing. It was really interesting. Anyhow, it did get our name out there, and there were certainly people who came in and ate. But in terms of our catering business, I don't think we ever got a single call. Anyhow, down the street, Clem Kalischer realized that I was, you know, I'd started welding, and he was really a terrific advocate. He showed my first work, and which I think Laurie Moffat bought. Thank you, Laurie. But anyhow, I had a lot of support, and you know, there are a lot of good people in the Berkshires, and I think, you know, unlike New York City, where people are really at odds often with their gallerists, and the Berkshires is not like that. I've been super lucky. My first show was at Spazi Contemporary Art in Housatonic, and that was being run by Richard Bertel and Gabrielle Senza, who were both, you know, and still are terrific artists. And they had this wonderful place. It was, they were having the Nuyorican poets come up, and there were plays, and they both played the cello. And so there were concerts up there. And I think at the time there were maybe 5 galleries in Housatonic, if you can believe it. And there was a real scene. There would be, you know, 400 people at an opening on some weekend. It was a different time, Washington. So I started making sculpture, and, you know, seriously, I decided that if I was as disciplined about making the furniture and getting it out there with the art, and treated it like a job, maybe I could sell it. And so I bought a copy of Art in America and looked to see where the people whose work I liked were showing. And I made a bunch of DVDs, if you know what those are. And I actually took them to galleries and said, you know, here's my work. If you ever have a chance, look at it. And got home, and the first call I got was from somebody who said, there is nothing on the CD. And so I had just spent all this time, you know, dragging these empty CDs around. So that was very not satisfying. I did it again and didn't hear anything from maybe 5 galleries that I had hoped to show in. But then about 6 months later, one by one, they all called. And I showed in all of them. And, you know, I've never sold out a show, but they all sold a few things. And it was enough to kind of keep you hooked and keep me in metal. And, you know, I think my mother and father bought probably 4 of my first pieces. Thank you very much. And, you know, definitely, and my sister too, kept me afloat for a while. But, you know, eventually your friends can't buy your work, and you don't want them to. But for a while, it really helped me get over the hump to take your work seriously. It was those galleries were saying, we want to show your work. And sculpture is a tough sell. It's not like painting or, you know, flat things that people can stick in a closet. Sculpture is more of a commitment. So it's harder to place. People might enjoy it. They can't imagine owning it. So, you know, it was a bit of a rough road at first, but, you know, it was terribly satisfying for me, you know, and I still don't know why. You know, why do I love looking at this piece? This is a very thin piece of granite that just hangs on that other form. Dick and I had been in Africa, and I've always been interested in African art. So I did a bunch of pieces that had references that were to African art. And I'm just going to run through, there's a video of the sculpture, and I'm just gonna share my YouTube screen and play this, because there's a lot of work, and I think it will go through a fair amount of it, just so you can see that there's a whole variety of stuff I do. If you were to describe my work, it's probably modernist. It's kind of early modern, but it's my own take. Some of it is just simple abstract. Some of it is absurdist. I try not to limit myself. If I feel like this is shrapnel, actual metal shrapnel there, that I found at the scrapyard in Pittsfield, which was slightly horrific, but I tried to do a series that reflected the beauty and horror of our world. Outdoor pieces, you know, they are so different. They kind of refract, or they, nature is a good foil. They're so at odds, or my work is, just because it's so different. But I think they both serve to show each other up. Some of my things, you can flip them different ways. So they're different, you know, there's no perfect, like these pieces are all, you can kind of flip them over, and they're kind of interesting in different ways. I keep thinking I should be making hats out of Kevlar or something. Protective shields people can carry on their heads. Anyhow, I combined, that piece has marble in it. There's more shrapnel. This piece is called Messages for Freud. You can write on it. Some of them are just shapes. Shadows are my best friend. You know, you just never know when you bring something into a space what it will do. There's a granite quarry in Chester, and so it's easy for me to get stone. That piece had grass growing down the middle of the table. Anyhow, you know, I'm just interested in shape. I'm not necessarily trying to tell a story, you know. I always say approach it as though you were having curry for the first time, a tasty coconut lime soup. It's either interesting or repulsive, but maybe it's worth reflecting on. And so, you know, that for me, that's what art really is. All right, let me get back out of this. Back over here. Okay. Sorry, bear with me here. Okay. So I do sculpture, but I'm also really interested in stuff and things and context. And I love peculiar things, or things that are not peculiar in one circumstance, but peculiar in another. And these are pictures of some of the surfaces in our house that are littered with treasures, but the sort of things that influence me. I love here's stone and bone and little bits of antiquities and some origami made by my sister. Dolls are a big presence in my work. They always represent kind of the innocence of kind of youth, and how we all start off kind of innocent. I collected eraser dust as a child, and this cow's head is covered with eraser dust. And when you approach that head, it says, "Hey, dude." So I've taken pictures for a long time. Oops. Wait, let me stop that. I'm going to open it up in YouTube. Oh, bear with me here. So one of the things that interests me is how context really is what you use to evaluate what it is you're looking at. And Dick and I travel a lot. And so these pictures you're looking at right now on the one side are the protests in Thailand, the other one, it's mostly Asia. It's not just Thailand, but the people wearing red are the red shirts in the protests. And then on the right is Burning Man. And it's interesting to see them side by side. I'm always fascinated traveling that you have these two worlds running concurrently. And especially with the internet now, it used to be you could go somewhere, but now you can be living in a place that has, you know, kids sitting on the back of water buffalo and rice paddies talking on their cell phone. You could, you know, be talking to somebody on your computer, living in a very different world. And so I'm interested in kind of putting things that don't necessarily go together in order to kind of reevaluate, a little bit like putting sculpture and nature. You know, they're both different because of the other. And I think with the photographs I take are not terribly interesting. They're interesting because where I've taken them. I happen to be someplace that had interesting stuff. And so it's an interesting picture, but my, you know, you look at some photographers' work and you think, ah, that's so-and-so's work. You don't look at my work and say, oh, that's Joe's picture. They're pictures. So I've always wanted to do something with them, but not present them as photographs. So I started working with some software. Seth and Mitch Nash convinced me to go to Burning Man one year, and I saw this projection at a party. And for the life of me, I couldn't tell what what I was looking at. It looked three-dimensional. But eventually I got home and was so frustrated, wondering, like, what was it that I was looking at? I went online, looked up the VJ that was doing that party, emailed him in LA, and he put me onto this German software that he was using to layer imagery in space. And it's done live. And if you see your Channel 7 news and the 7 is spinning around and there are circles spinning around the 7, that's the technology. So it's a very kind of, everybody uses it. They just don't do artistic stuff with it. So what interested me about it was the quality of great. And so these images are chattery and they're not wildly clear, but you can project this 30 feet across and it does not pixelate. It is sharp, crisp. The images are maybe 1 megapixel. They're tiny images, they're not big. So it uses this, amazing technology to, but here you can see that what I do is I record these videos and then I pull stills out of them. So I record at maybe 60 frames per second and then go through hour and 20-minute video, 60 frames a second, which just takes forever, but you get these just incredible, I think, wonderful combinations of things. To me, it's just, just fascinating what this will produce. So let me get out of this and go back here. And so here are just some stills that I have pulled out. And, they combine, I love classical art. So I Photoshop out, the parts I want. Here we're at Wynwood in Florida. I'm not entirely sure where this painting is from. Maybe the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and then I think the British Museum, the sculpture there is the British Museum, Paris, and let's see, something knitted. And then we have some crucifix. But anyhow, here this goat was on the steps at Varanasi graffiti from Wynwood. Anyhow, you just get, so some of this is graffiti is from Florida, or they're both from Florida, but from different places. And then a little graphic from one of my favorite blue Q bags. Anyhow, to me, these are just wonderfully interesting and conjure up things that, you know, it doesn't mean anything. And yet you can't but wonder when you look at them. And I find that really interesting. You know, beautiful Greek carved bone here. This woman's head in the middle is from a piece of fabric in a groovy clothing store in Bangkok, and some little clown doll from a yard sale. Wonderful graffiti from Florida again. The local character some of you may recognize. This guy smoking a pipe that was carved onto the wall at the school that was turned into a torture chamber in Phnom Penh, Tool Sling. And this was some children's graffiti. And it was just ironic that there was also a picture of a six-shooter, that this place of innocence would turn into a place where they tortured people. So let's see, since, so I do the video projections. I don't have any of the projections to show you tonight because the technology was not going to allow for it to be shown in high resolution, and it kind of defeats the purpose. But I've been working on a few projects since COVID. This is a 25-foot garden wall I made for my cousin in Cambridge, which I just love. And this was just after it went in and was beginning to rust, but next spring it will have a beautiful dark rust patina on it. This is a stainless sculpture I just installed in Sheffield, and I love this piece. It also can flop around a bunch of different ways, and I just think beautiful shape. This is the new entryway at Blue Q. These guys are my good friends and have, sent me more excellent projects than anybody I know. Anyhow, they are a catalyst for all things good in the Berkshires. I'm sure if you know Seth and Mitch, you know that to be true. So this is a bit of a departure. This is my mother's website. She's a food historian, and it is basically a database of food-related books, manuscripts, and it is international. And the reason I bring it up is because my sister Catherine and I have been working with Mom to get this up and online, which it is. And what's interesting about what she does is that she is interested in being able to look at a work in order to evaluate it against everything that exists around it. So she's kind of contextualizing the object in order to know whether the facts in it are accurate, or it's been translated, or it's a copy, or, so when you hold it up against this other stuff, it will tell you kind of what is fact and what is fiction. And that's really the purpose of it. And I was thinking when I was getting this talk together that I kind of do the opposite thing. I'm interested in taking something that you recognize and changing the context in order to reevaluate it. So I think that it's quite ironic that I ended up helping her with this, because it's not my area of expertise, facts and all. But anyhow, I thought that was just interesting. And because of her research and what she's interested in, I certainly take more care to evaluate what it is I'm looking at. So even if I do change the context, I try not to make fun of it or misrepresent it, which is very easy. But I always feel like if I'm featuring it, I'm paying homage to it. That's my feeling. And, you know, it's a little bit like sampling music. I think, you know, there are people that say, oh, you know, I shouldn't be borrowing, you know, if there's a piece of graffiti, I should not be featuring it in my work because I'm basically stealing their work. Well, I don't really feel like that. I feel like maybe a musician who's using the notes that are, you know, informing them. And so anyhow, that's basically what I have to say. And let me just see if I have any more slides here. I guess I do not. So I would open it up for questions if anybody has any.
Joe, thank you so much. Ignore my little photo here. I apologize for being off video. It makes things a little smoother. But Joe, it's such a luxury to get to see your work still and really take it in and sit with all of those details that are so thoughtfully compiled together. So thank you for sharing all of that. And if anyone would like to just hop off mute and ask a question or use the raise hand feature, or put your question in the chat, I can read it aloud.
I have many questions.
Fabulous.
But I can start with one. Hey, Joe. All right, can you hear me okay? Okay, so I love like the comparison that you made to the work that your mom has been doing. And so like, it seems that, you know, you really love to juxtaposition the context of certain pieces against one another rather than focusing on the comparison of the mediums themselves. So do you mind that like when people see your work, they might not understand the colliding of context in a way that you do, or do you put these things together to like challenge people to question what the intersection is or anything like that?
You know, it's a great question. And, you know, I'm constantly wrestling with why things appeal to me and why they don't. And, you know, my feeling about my own work changes, you know, over time. You know, I think there's a certain amount of just exuberance that overtakes one when you're making something that kind of blinds you to being critical. And sometimes when you can step back after you've got over the thrill of breaking some ground, you know, you can say, well, okay, it's all right, but maybe I could refine it. But, you know, my stuff, I'm not out to tell a story, and yet I'm very specific about what I choose to work with. So, you know, I have chosen the images and I have put them together and I have chosen the ones I like. So, you know, on the one hand, I'm not really trying to tell a story. And on the other hand, there are things about what's in the images that interest me for whatever reason. And I think, you know, with the art, with the sculpture, I think, you know, that is really, it's more like an atmosphere. It's like, you know, it suggests something, but isn't specific. Whereas with the imagery, I think, you know, sometimes it's very specific. If somebody's hanging on a cross, you know, there's no wondering what that's about. And yet, you know, some things that look horrific could be like the shrapnel. When I bought it because it was beautiful. And I also did not know what it was. And we were at a museum of war, and there was a case that had these huge hunks of metal. And it was obvious to me what I had picked up that came from GE Ordnance was shrapnel. And I was horrified, and I didn't do anything with it for years. So, you know, don't assume the artist always knows what they're doing. I sold a whole slew of that work before I knew what it was. To me, it was just pretty metal. So, you know, I think on the one hand, yes, I choose it for whatever reason, but I'm not really telling us a specific story. And I like the idea. I mean, music, when you listen to music, you don't know how it emerges in somebody's head. And I kind of see it like that. It emerges or it doesn't. You know, maybe it's nails on a board when somebody looks at it. That's a good question. I wrestle with it all the time.
I can imagine. It's the specificity. I mean, you could put it in so many different contexts, right? Depending on what your perspective is or on the day, right?
Exactly. There's a fellow right now in the Berkshires. David Rickey has just been posting some pictures of tar you know, where they fill in the tar for winter in the, you know, because it suggests certain things. And I think that's kind of art. You know, we're all seeing things where things weren't, and we feel, you know, that space might be improved by, you know, something, just like an empty space, a quiet space you fill with music, and all of a sudden it's different. It doesn't mean that the other one is invalid. It's just, it changes it. It creates an atmosphere that wasn't there before.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks for that question, Michelle. And yeah, that's what you do, Joe. You're always changing the atmosphere, especially through your projections. Incredible. We have a question from Mary Nash in the chat. What was it about eraser dust that interested you when you were young? And how has your use of eraser dust changed over the years?
Well, Mary, that's a good question. I think, you know, I was hyper, and I think it gave me something to do when I was sitting down. And if you ever had a shoebox full of eraser dust, you would love it. It's just, it's pink and fluffy. And when you set the box down, it kind of has this funny little bounce. It's just an odd material. I mean, that is a really good question. I don't really know. I think it seemed friendly, and I don't know. I really don't know. But I think, to me, I've always been fascinated by reliquaries. And at Burning Man, people give stuff to each other. And I always filled up in Thailand. You can buy little reliquary containers at the amulet market. And so I have always taken, or the few times I've been, I've taken razor dust with a little gold leaf in it and given it to people, you know, just because it, to me, in some ways, like pink hair curlers, you know, suggests the absurdity of our preoccupation with whatever, you know. And I think eraser dust, it's like, why do I collect eraser dust? Because it's so absurd. Why would you collect eraser dust? And it's so cheerful.
Thank you, Joe. That's a typical collector response.
Thank you. Very nice answer.
I have a question. I don't know how to ask it. Did I just speak up?
Yes, perfect.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Joe. So your digital work is just so exciting and has so much energy to it. And to me, anyway, it just has such a different feel from your work in metal, which is so serene and graceful. And I don't know, you see yourself moving away from metal or going back to metal, and with a changed perspective? What's the synergy between those forms?
I think they're, you know, in some ways they're foils for each other. The thing I hate, you know, I started doing the video stuff. I hurt my shoulder and I had a shoulder replacement, but for a couple of years before it was replaced, I really couldn't use it. And so I was not welding, and I was kind of panic stricken because it was my identity, or I thought it was. And that was just when I'd been to Burning Man and seen that video, and I started doing it maybe to see if whether this was something that maybe I could do something with, because I needed to figure something out. And so it was kind of, I mean, I think in some ways they are both I mean, they're so different, I agree. And I love them both. I think I like the serenity of the sculpture because it's serene and my inner self is so chaotic. But I think maybe the still and the video stuff maybe reflects more the manic nature of that part of me, just my endless interests and wanting to have everything all at once. It was very hard for me not to play loud music in the background during this whole thing, because the idea that there would be, perfect silence was just terrifying. But I don't think I really answered your question. Other than,
you're schizophrenic, is what you said.
yes, totally, completely. Without, I mean, you know me. Does this come as a big surprise?
Great question, Michael. Would anyone else like to just jump in or put a question into the chat?
I have a question.
Excellent.
So Joe, I thought it was really interesting that you referenced how your video projections combine kind of recognizable images and that you think of them in the same way of like sampled music. And I'm wondering if that idea is something that inspired them to be accompanied by dance music and sampled sounds, or if that was something that you discovered after the fact when seeing that, I guess, together.
Yeah, good question. And partly it was that you cannot post anything with music that has been registered. And so I found that I was a little bit frustrated with what you could buy in the way of music to, inexpensively. And I was, going to Fruity Loops to buy content from my sampler. And it was just easier to make my own music. And I don't know the difference between A and a C and a major and a minor. I just, whack away at these little things, and you can, it's a little bit like the video. You can dump anything on them, and if it works for me, that's good enough. And, it is not, I wouldn't pretend for a second that it's terrific music, but, I'll take a great song, reverse it, and then chop it up into slices and then play them like a piano. So, there are ways of getting music sounds without really totally stealing, which I have no interest in doing. I have no interest in appropriating other people's work. And yet I'm kind of limited by my own inability as a musician and too impatient to sit down and practice like real musicians would. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I just think it's really interesting to think about that sampling.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had to, because the first time I uploaded a video like 10 minutes before a deadline, and it was rejected because I was using some song, even though I attribute it to the artist, it was, so anyhow, that was a bad moment.
Nightmarish.
Yeah, like so much of my life. No, not really.
We have another question in the chat. The question is, you mentioned that shadows are your best friend. When you've approached your work, have you ever tried to achieve a particular silhouette or shadow versus the physical sculpture itself?
I've done enough of it now so that I kind of know what shadows will do. But often you don't know where a piece will end up. You can plan it for a gallery where it's going to be shown, but you don't know its ultimate location. So it's a little hard to conceive a piece with that in mind. But say, if you look at the piece that's on the screen now, you can see that, there are shadows. And when the snow is on the ground, there will be very visible shadows. The piece will be less visible because, it'll have snow on it. If it were black, it would stand out, but it's stainless. And so I always feel like, it kind of, sometimes the shadows are so hard and distinct that you can't differentiate it from the piece. you know, which makes it interesting. And in the daylight, maybe it's different than when the lights come on in the house, if it's an indoor piece. So, you know, I think, you know, in many ways it's, you know, serves to kind of change, keep the piece interesting. And if you move a piece away from a window into the interior of the room, it can change it entirely or turn it 180 degrees. So I'm always interested, but I don't conceive of a piece with the shadows as part of the design. But I do know that, you know, when you move away from the ground, you know, the shadow softens, and or from the wall. And, you know, sometimes people light work because they want a very specific shadow. To me, it's a little limiting, but if it means not seeing the piece, by all means, light it. Does that answer your question?
That's so interesting to hear, Joe. Yeah, they're your best friend, and they're also your collaborator in your
Yes. Yeah, they're my allies, unlike wood. Seth, did you hear that?
We can take a couple more questions.
I actually have another question, and it's about, well, all of your pieces, but this one in particular that's on the screen. You mentioned this one that it can be like, I think you actually said rolled around and like move in different ways. Is that like the way that it's set up here in this image? Is that how you intended for it to be, and you have an expectation that that's how it's supposed to go? Or do you embrace the idea that that your pieces can be moved in different directions and be oriented in new ways?
This specific piece was made so that it could be moved. And actually, I ran into a bit of a problem after I had quoted the people who commissioned it a price, thinking that I could make it out of solid stainless. And when I ordered it, it turned out that the material was going to weigh 700 pounds. And I thought, well, that piece is not going to be easily, you know, flipped over. And if it does flip over or falls over on somebody, you know, there may be a few arms and fingers laying on the grass next to it. So I had to redesign this piece so that it was hollow, and all four corners of each one of those elements are welded. So it was just, it turned into this just ridiculous amount of work, but it is now, you know, one person, ideally two people, can stand it upright so that the point is straight up in the air. You can roll it three other ways. This is my favorite, and it's my favorite angle, but it actually works quite well from three ways. You know, they have this incredible view, and it seems silly to put something in front of it. So I don't love the idea of like having something come up into the view, but it's their piece. They can run a tractor over it if they want to.
Thank you.
Joe, you can probably hear me laughing over here in the office. Still have time for a couple more questions.
I had another question.
Okay.
So, because it kind of aligns with this idea of mediums. So, you don't like wood, we got that. Did you translate or carry over any skills from the ceramic start you had into welding or metalworking? Or did you like experience a rejection of the limitations of ceramics, and that's what pushed you to like love the characteristics of metal?
I think actually metal and ceramics are a lot alike. They have similar properties in that, you know, you can do many different things. You can cast both of them. You can form them, you know, one with a hammer and one with your hands, or roll it. So I think ceramics I liked a lot. But I knew it. And it was more fun doing something I didn't know as well. And ceramics terribly fragile, and I break everything. So metal was just perfect. It's just, you're gonna have to work at breaking it. And so I really like that. I don't worry about it the way you would ceramics. And You know, I worry about finishes on metal, which are so delicate. That's my big bête noire with metal. Is you know, if you decide you want to have a patina on it, it becomes quite fragile, and it seems, you know. There you go. You might as well have made it of black ceramics, and have thought repeatedly of coming back to IS183 and throwing and making some stuff, seeing if I can still do it, if I'm as bad a ceramicist as I am a hockey player, which I did as a kid.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
You should totally get back into the ceramic studio at IS183.
Oh,
yeah. And Seth wants to know why you don't like wood.
It's not that I don't like wood. I love wood, but I shouldn't be near it because I'm not careful enough. I just destroy. I took a stone carving class, and I went over to Lee Marble where they have beautiful white marble. I don't think you can go in there anymore, but in those days, I got myself this beautiful piece of marble, and I was taking a class with Ann John, who's a local sculptor, and I started off with this beautiful piece of stone and just destroyed it. And I thought, what a presumptuous thing that I thought I could bring something to this. And I did not. And I feel a little bit the same way with wood, in that it's such a beautiful material. And it seems that I don't have the right sensibilities to work with it. You need to be quite precise and precision. Nah.
While we're on the medium and material topic, I noticed in your description you did mention printmaking, and I was hoping you could touch on your printmaking experience and how that evolved.
Well, at Alfred, they had beautiful old litho stones, and there was a guy by the name of John Wood, who was an older fellow who was probably in his 80s when I was taking, but he was wonderful creative force, and really inspired you. And I was doing photography, and you could do photo transfer onto the stones, and so it was kind of the era of pop art. And so I was trying to do stuff that was kind of had heroic images and things that represented kind of ordinary, and juxtaposing them but I don't, it was too much like wood. It was, you had to be so careful not to get ink on everything. And I'm messy. Anybody who's been to my house or our house knows I'm messy. And, my finished pieces are not messy unless I don't care. Sometimes messy is fine. Sometimes messy, you need messy. But printmaking wants you to be a little tidy. And I don't know, I'm not crazy about flat. And I think it's one of the reasons I love projections, because now with today's projectors, they focus on every surface. So you can project onto three-dimensional surfaces and it's focused on everything. And it helps to kind of extend the kind of curiosity factor. I mean, if I could add smell and sound, I'd just be in heaven.
Sounds like that's what's next.
I hope.
Well, it is 7 o'clock. I can't believe it. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And thank you, Joe, for such an amazing talk and sharing a little bit of your world with us.
Well, I appreciate being asked, and I appreciate all you folks for showing up.
Have a great night, everybody.
And go democracy.
Yeah.
Bye, Carol and Michael.
Bye, Joe.
Bye, Joe.
Take
Thank
care.
you, Joe.
Bye,
See you in the real
Suzanne.
world.
Bye, Seth.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I can only see a few of you.
Oh, if you shut off your
Parker.
you shut off your screen here, you can see them.
Oh, if I shut off my screen. Michael. If I
Hi,
shut
Joe.
off. Hey.
Nice job.
Oh, thanks for showing up. I was